It was supposed to be the gentlest Christmas of our lives. No loud parties, no travel, no expectations beyond warmth, safety, and the quiet miracle growing inside my wife. Snow had fallen overnight, the kind that softened everything it touched, muffling the world into something calmer, kinder. The lights along our street glowed softly in the early evening, and for a moment, standing there with my coat buttoned tight and my breath fogging the air, I allowed myself to believe that peace was possible. Even in a neighborhood ruled by rules, fines, and the ever-watchful eye of the HO, my wife, 8 months pregnant, walked slowly beside me, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other gripping my arm for balance. Every step mattered. Every breath mattered. We weren't late, we weren't loud, and we certainly weren't breaking any rules. We were simply heading back to our own home after a short visit to the nearby church, where candles had flickered and voices had joined in hymns about hope, love, and mercy. Ironically, mercy would be the one thing missing before the night was over. She appeared just as we reached our driveway. Karen had a way of materializing when you least wanted conflict. Tall, stiff-backed, wrapped in an expensive coat that somehow never seemed warm enough for her personality. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk like a sentry guarding imaginary borders. Her smile was thin, rehearsed, and entirely devoid of kindness. The clipboard in her hand might as well have been a weapon. "Excuse me," she said sharply, her eyes never leaving my wife's stomach. "You can't bring unauthorized guests into the community during holiday hours." I blinked, genuinely confused. "We live here," I replied calmly, "and we're not hosting anyone." She tilted her head, lips pursed. "I've received complaints. Your decorations are non-compliant. Religious symbolism exceeding HOA guidelines." And frankly, her gaze dropped again. "This is not the time for disturbances." My wife shifted uncomfortably. "It's Christmas," she said softly. "We're just going home." Karen's eyes hardened. "Not tonight. You'll need to leave the premises until this is sorted out. HOA authority allows temporary removal in cases of non-compliance." I felt my chest tighten. "You're telling my pregnant wife to leave our home on Christmas night? In the cold?" Karen shrugged, the smallest motion, but one heavy with cruelty. "Rules don't take holidays off." My wife's breathing became shallow. I saw it immediately, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her hand pressed harder against her belly. Stress wasn't just emotional now, it was dangerous. I stepped in front of her instinctively. "This is harassment," I said, "and it's reckless." Karen's voice dropped, sharp and final. "You can argue later. Right now, she needs to go." Neighbors peeked through curtains. Porch lights flicked on, then off. No one stepped forward. No one ever did. My wife's eyes glistened, not with tears yet, but with something worse, humiliation, fear. The quiet devastation of realizing that dignity could be stripped away so easily, even on a night meant to celebrate love. I wrapped my arm around her. "It's okay," I whispered, though it wasn't. "We'll be fine." Karen gestured toward the street. "I'll wait." That was the moment something in me changed. Not anger, something colder, something resolved. "Give us a minute," I said evenly. She nodded, already convinced of her victory. We walked a few steps away, my wife leaning heavily into me now. "I am okay," she lied. I could feel her shaking. "You don't have to be strong," I said. "Not tonight." We reached the edge of the driveway, and that's when the sound began. Bells. Soft at first, distant, the unmistakable jingle of something absurdly out of place. Karen turned, annoyed. "What now?" From the end of the street emerged a figure illuminated by the glow of Christmas lights and street lamps. Red suit, white beard, a sack slung over one shoulder. Children's laughter echoed from somewhere nearby. Santa Claus walked calmly toward us. Karen scoffed. "This is a private community. No soliciting." Santa stopped a few feet away. He looked at my wife first. Not at her stomach, not with judgment, but with warmth. Real warmth. The kind that makes you feel seen. "Ma'am," he said gently, "are you all right?" She nodded slowly. I think so. Karen stepped forward. This doesn't concern you. You need to leave. Santa turned to her, and something shifted. His smile faded, not into anger, but into authority. Quiet. Absolute. Actually, he said, it concerns me very much. Karen laughed sharply. You're dressed as Santa. This is ridiculous. He reached into his coat, not the sack, and pulled out a badge. The air went still. I'm her husband, he said calmly, nodding toward my wife. And I'm also the county housing commissioner. Karen's face drained of color. And tonight, he continued, voice steady, you just violated multiple state protections for pregnant residents and committed unlawful eviction. The clipboard slipped from her fingers. Neighbors stepped out now. Phones came up. Whispers spread. Santa, no, my father-in-law, walked closer, placing himself between Karen and my wife. You don't get to ruin Christmas with cruelty, he said quietly. Not in my county. My wife exhaled for the first time in minutes. Snow continued to fall, indifferent and beautiful, as justice finally arrived. Wrapped in red, carrying the weight of the law, and standing exactly where he was needed most. And this was only the beginning. The silence that followed felt heavier than the snow gathering at our feet. Karen stood frozen, her mouth opening as if words might appear to save her. But none came. Authority has a strange effect on people like her. Those who wield borrowed power collapse when confronted with the real thing. The clipboard at her feet looked suddenly ridiculous, a flimsy prop stripped of meaning. My father-in-law adjusted the Santa hat slightly, not to play the part, but to steady himself. He turned to my wife again, softer now. Let's get you inside, he said. You shouldn't be standing out here. Karen found her voice at last, brittle and defensive. This is a misunderstanding. HOA protocol ends here, he interrupted, not raising his voice. You do not have the authority you think you have. And you certainly do not have the right to remove a pregnant resident from her home. On Christmas. Phones were out now. The neighbors who had hidden moments earlier suddenly remembered how to stand, how to watch, how to be present when consequences were imminent. Someone whispered Karen's name like a warning bell. My wife leaned into me as we walked toward the house, my father-in-law flanking us like a quiet guardian. I unlocked the door with shaking hands, and the warmth inside wrapped around us instantly. The smell of pine, cinnamon, and the dinner we'd planned to reheat later. It felt unreal that moments ago we'd been told we didn't belong here. As soon as she sat down, my wife's composure finally broke. Tears fell silently, her hands resting on her belly, as if apologizing to the life inside for the stress it had endured. I knelt beside her, helpless anger burning in my chest. This shouldn't have happened, I said. My father-in-law nodded. It won't happen again. Outside, Karen paced, speaking rapidly into her phone. I didn't need to hear the words to know the tone. Damage control, blame shifting, the frantic scramble of someone realizing they've crossed a line they can't uncross. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car arrived. Then another. HOA board members followed shortly after, summoned by Karen herself in a desperate attempt to reclaim control. Instead, they walked into a scene already documented, recorded, and quietly judged by half the street. My father-in-law stepped back outside, still in the red suit, the image surreal enough that one of the officers blinked twice before recognizing him. Credentials were shown. Statements were taken. Karen's voice rose, cracked, then fell into sobs when the words "formal investigation" were spoken aloud. The board members avoided eye contact with us when they came inside to apologize. Their words were practiced, hollow. My wife listened politely, exhaustion written across her face. I don't want apologies, she said quietly. I want this to never happen to anyone else. That landed harder than any accusation. The following days unfolded quickly. News spread not just through the neighborhood but beyond it. A pregnant woman ordered out of her home on Christmas by an HOA president who thought rules outweighed humanity was a story people paid attention to, especially when Santa Claus turned out to be the county housing commissioner. Karen was suspended within 48 hours, then removed entirely. The HOA issued a public statement promising reform, training, and oversight. New bylaws were drafted. Emergency protections were put in place for vulnerable residents. It all came too late to erase what had already happened, but it mattered. On Christmas morning, my wife woke to sunlight spilling across the room and a sense of calm she hadn't felt in weeks. The baby kicked, strong and sure, as if reminding us that life continued despite cruelty. My father-in-law visited later that day, without the suit this time, carrying nothing but a small gift and a quiet smile. He hugged his daughter carefully, lingering just a moment longer than usual. "I wasn't trying to make a statement," he said later, sitting at our table. "I just wanted to protect my family." "You did more than that," I replied. "You reminded people what power is supposed to look like." Outside, children played in the snow. Neighbors waved. Some came by with casseroles, awkward smiles, apologies they didn't know how to phrase. We accepted what felt genuine and let the rest pass. Weeks later, when our child was born, healthy, loud, and utterly perfect, we told the story softly, not as a tale of humiliation, but of resilience. Of a night when dignity was challenged and restored. Of a lesson learned too late for some, but just in time for others. And every Christmas after that, when the lights go up and the snow falls just right, we remember the night Santa showed up. Not with toys or magic, but with justice. Time has a way of revealing things that outrage alone cannot. In the weeks after the birth of our child, life slowed into the soft, sleepless rhythm of feedings, quiet dawns, and the gentle rediscovery of joy. Yet beneath that calm, something else was unfolding. Something bigger than our family. Something rooted in that cold Christmas night when power was challenged and exposed. The investigation into the HOA didn't stop with Karen's removal. It widened, uncovering years of complaints quietly dismissed, fines issued selectively, warnings weaponized against those who were different, vulnerable, or simply inconvenient. Elderly residents, single mothers, disabled veterans, stories surfaced one by one, each echoing the same pattern of intimidation dressed up as community standards. My wife read them slowly, sometimes stopping when the parallels became too familiar. "I thought it was just us," she said one evening, rocking our newborn while the house rested in shadows. "I thought maybe I was overreacting." "You weren't," I replied. "You never were." What Karen had done to her wasn't an isolated act of cruelty. It was the inevitable result of unchecked authority. And now, for the first time, that authority was being examined under a light it could not escape. Public hearing was scheduled. Attendance was optional, they said. No one believed that for a second. The room was packed. Residents filled every chair, lined the walls, stood shoulder to shoulder in aisles meant for walking, not witnessing reckoning. Cameras lined the back of the room. The HOA board sat stiffly at the front, faces tight, hands folded as if prayer might undo what had already been set in motion. Karen sat alone. Gone was the immaculate confidence, the perfectly pressed blazer, the smirk that once dared anyone to challenge her. She looked smaller now, not because she had changed physically, but because the illusion had shattered. When her name was called, she stood slowly, eyes darting around the room she once ruled. My wife didn't attend. She didn't need to. She had already endured enough public scrutiny. But I went, for her, and for those who had been silenced long before us. Karen spoke first, her voice trembling as she described misunderstandings and misinterpretations of policy. She apologized, but it was the kind of apology that never quite admitted wrongdoing, more concerned with consequences than conscience. Then residents were invited to speak. One by one they stood. A widower whose car had been towed repeatedly during chemotherapy treatments. A young couple fined into near bankruptcy over a wheelchair ramp. A retired teacher threatened with eviction for feeding stray cats in winter. Each voice added weight, not with anger, but with truth. When my turn came, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm not here to punish," I said. "I'm here to remind us that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around." My wife was 8 months pregnant. It was Christmas, and she was told to leave her home. If that can happen to her, it can happen to anyone. The room was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of avoidance, but the heavy kind, the kind that settles when people realize they've been complicit by doing nothing. The board voted unanimously. Karen was permanently barred from holding any HOA position within the county. Oversight was mandated. External audits scheduled. Training required. Real consequences, not symbolic ones. But justice didn't end there. The story traveled, shared online, discussed in community forums, cited in housing advocacy meetings. Our county introduced new legislation weeks later. Emergency protections during holidays, stricter limitations on HOA authority, mandatory review processes for any eviction-related action. My father-in-law never took credit publicly. He didn't have to. The change spoke for itself. At home, life continued in quieter ways. Our child grew quickly, filling the house with sounds that felt like hope given a voice. My wife healed, not just physically but emotionally. The humiliation of that night faded, replaced by something steadier. Confidence. Resolve. One afternoon, months later, a knock came at the door. It was Karen. She stood there without makeup, without pretense, holding nothing but an envelope. For a moment I considered not answering. But something in her posture, not entitled, not demanding, made me pause. "I won't take much time," she said softly. I needed to say this in person." She didn't step inside. She didn't ask to. "I was wrong," she said. "Not just that night. For years. I thought authority made me important. I didn't realize it was turning me into someone cruel." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, careful, apologetic. No excuses. No conditions. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added. "But I wanted you to know that night changed me. And I'm sorry. I didn't respond right away. Some wounds don't close on command. Some apologies arrive after the damage is done." But I nodded, acknowledging the effort if not the absolution. "Take care," I said simply. She left without another word. That night I told my wife everything. She listened quietly, then looked down at our child sleeping peacefully between us. "I don't hate her," she said finally. "But I won't forget. And I don't need to." And that was enough. Because forgetting isn't required for healing. Accountability is. The neighborhood changed after that. Not overnight, not perfectly, but noticeably. People spoke up more. Checked in on one another. Rules were enforced with explanation instead of intimidation. And every Christmas, when the lights went up and the snow fell, there was an unspoken understanding shared among us all. Power has limits. Dignity does not. And sometimes, justice arrives wearing red, carrying the weight of the law, and reminding everyone that even on the coldest nights, humanity must come first. Years pass quietly when justice is done properly. There is no constant noise, no lingering chaos. Just the slow, meaningful shift of a place learning how to be human again. That neighborhood, once ruled by fear disguised as order, softened over time. Not because rules disappeared, but because compassion finally had a seat at the table. Our child grew into a curious toddler, then a bright-eyed little soul who loved Christmas more than any other day of the year. Every December, lights went up a little earlier on our street. People smiled more. Doors stayed open longer. It was subtle, but it was real. Trauma doesn't vanish. It transforms when it's acknowledged. One evening, close to Christmas, my wife and I walked the same sidewalk where she had once been told she didn't belong. She pushed the stroller slowly, bundled against the cold, her breath visible in the air. There was no fear in her steps now. No hesitation, just quiet confidence. "Do you ever think about that night?" I asked. She nodded. "Not with pain anymore, with perspective." That was the victory Karen never understood. You can humiliate someone publicly, but when they reclaim their dignity, the shame changes hands. The HOA board changed again the following year, this time through fair elections instead of intimidation. New leadership invited residents to speak openly, not just during hearings, but regularly. Committees were formed not to punish, but to protect. Holiday enforcement was suspended entirely. Emergency clauses were written with bold lettering and zero ambiguity. No resident shall be displaced during holidays, medical emergencies, or vulnerable conditions, under any circumstance. Those words mattered. My father-in-law retired not long after. At his farewell gathering, he didn't speak about policies or power. He spoke about responsibility. Authority, he said, isn't proven by how much control you have, but by how gently you use it. My wife squeezed my hand as he spoke. She knew better than anyone what misuse of authority felt like. That Christmas, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood organized a small gathering at the community center. Nothing formal, no speeches, just food, laughter, and shared space. Children ran between tables. Music played softly. Someone dressed as Santa. Not my father-in-law this time, just a volunteer with a kind laugh and a crooked beard. My wife hesitated at the door. I waited. Then she stepped inside. Applause broke out. Not loud, not theatrical, but warm, respectful. People who had once watched silently now stood openly. One woman approached her with tears in her eyes. I should have spoken up, she said. That night. My wife smiled gently. You're speaking now. Forgiveness doesn't always look like absolution. Sometimes it looks like permission to move forward. Later that night, as snow fell again, soft, familiar, forgiving, we stood outside watching our child chase flakes under the glow of streetlights. Do you think people really change? I asked. She thought for a moment. I think some people learn, and learning is enough. Karen was never mentioned again in meetings. Her name faded into the background where it belonged, not erased but no longer powerful. She moved away eventually. No one celebrated. No one mourned. Her absence was simply quieter. And that was the point. This story was never about revenge. It was about boundaries, about reminding those who think authority grants superiority that humanity outranks both, about proving that dignity doesn't need permission to exist. Every Christmas since, we've told our child a gentler version of the story, not about cruelty but about courage, about a night when fear tried to win and failed, about how standing firm, even while trembling, can change more than you ever intended. And sometimes, when the snow is just right and the lights glow softly against the dark, we smile at each other, remembering the night Santa came not with gifts, but with justice. Because the real miracle wasn't who Santa was. It was who we refused to become. If you want, next I can. There is a strange peace that comes after something breaks and is rebuilt the right way. Not louder, not grander, just steadier. That was what remained long after the cameras were gone, after hearings ended, after names stopped being whispered with tension attached to them. The street returned to being a street. The houses returned to being homes. And Christmas returned to being Christmas. Our child grew old enough to ask questions. Not the simple ones, but the thoughtful ones that stop you mid-step. One evening, while helping hang ornaments, small hands paused on a red one shaped like a bell. Why do you like Christmas so much? Our child asked. My wife and I exchanged a glance. Not heavy, not sad, honest. Because, she said gently, it reminds us that people should be kind when it matters most. That was the version the child needed. The rest could wait. Years later, we attended a holiday event hosted by the county. One focused on housing dignity, tenant rights, and community responsibility. Survivors spoke. Advocates listened. Policies were discussed, but stories carried the weight. When my wife was invited to speak, she hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward. She didn't talk about Karen by name. She didn't need to. She spoke about standing in the cold while pregnant, about fear disguised as rules, about how silence from bystanders hurts almost as much as cruelty itself. And she spoke about what happens when someone finally steps in, not with anger, but with authority guided by conscience. I wasn't saved by power, she said. I was saved by accountability. The room stood when she finished. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Afterward, a young couple approached us. New homeowners, nervous, expecting their first child. "We're scared of HOAs," the woman admitted. This helped. That was when we realized the story had outgrown us. It wasn't just about one Christmas, or one neighborhood, or one woman named Karen who confused control for leadership. It was about how easily systems fail when empathy is removed, and how quickly they can change when people refuse to accept injustice quietly. Every December now we volunteer, not out of obligation but gratitude. Food drives, tenant support programs, holiday check-ins for families navigating medical or housing stress. We don't dress as heroes. We don't need recognition. We just show up, because showing up is what changes things. On the anniversary of that night, we stood once more at the edge of our driveway, snow settling the same way it had years before. The street was quiet, peaceful, safe. My wife slipped her hand into mine. "Do you regret any of it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. I regret that it happens to people who don't get a Santa. That's why we keep speaking. And that is why this story matters. Because somewhere, right now, a woman is being told she doesn't belong. A family is being pushed by paperwork instead of protected by law. Someone is standing in the cold while others look away. And maybe, just maybe, this story reminds someone watching that silence is a choice, and so is courage. Rules should never outweigh humanity. Authority should never erase dignity. And no one, especially not on Christmas, should be made to feel homeless in their own life. Sometimes justice comes loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly. And sometimes it arrives wearing red, holding the line between cruelty and compassion, reminding us all who Santa is really supposed to be.